All right, everyone. Welcome to the latest Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign. Today is the 9th of June. It is Tuesday, and this is the State of Trees, June 2026. Best practices in research work from the STEM Enhancement in Earth Sciences, or SEAS, summer intern program supported by NASA. An intimate look into a special issue of the Journal of Earth Observation and Geospatial Applications. Super excited to see this because it is an entire journal that is dedicated to the amazing work that Peter Nelson and one of our colleague Rusty Lowe have done with these amazing students that are part of the SEAS program. And I don't want to steal any thunder. I'll let Peter introduce them after I do my introduction, my quick introduction here and some announcements. I'm going to let him take it away because they are the experts in this journal and the science that they've done. And you'll see the amazing things. Hopefully, some of you who are participating in this webinar and those of you who will watch this recording, who are watching this recording, will have gone through the journal because the link has been associated and attached with the announcement and the shareable since we mentioned this about a month ago. So that was, and it's open access, so you're able to see all those journal articles as well as the entire journal and the individual articles as well. A lot of those, which Peter and his and the students and the artist who created the cover art for this is here as well. We'll be talking about today. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to start with announcements. We're going to do the feature presentations, which is going to be led by our own Peter Nelson. And then we can have some discussion, some Q&A with that as well. And I'll let Peter decide on that, how he wants to handle that. But then I want to, first with some announcements. Just literally like an hour ago, NASA announced the Artemis 3 crew. And here's a picture of the Artemis 3 crew. We have Andre Douglas, and this is from left to right. And I want to announce this because this is really crucial for, what we're doing here at NASA. Andre Douglas, he is a NASA astronaut and Artemis 3 mission specialist. Luca Palmitano, he is an ESA astronaut, so the European Space Agency astronaut and Artemis 3 pilot. Randy Bresnik, he is a NASA astronaut and Artemis 3 commander. And Frank Rubio, the NASA astronaut and Artemis 3 mission specialist. So, like I said, these were just announced by our NASA administrator, Jared Isaacman, just about an hour ago on a live stream from the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, in the United States. So quickly, just a little bit here. I just wanted to show you this, a little bit about Artemis 3. It's going to be a little different, of course, than Artemis 2. Artemis 3 is basically informing lander rendezvous, and you'll see here and habitation concepts. So there's going to be a lot of test docking to test out a bunch of preparation for future surface missions to the lunar surface, which would be essentially Artemis 4. And you can see here it's scheduled for 2027. It's going to be crewed with those 4 astronauts, okay? And it's going to demonstrate the systems needed for lunar landing. And you can learn more about it here at this website here, or you can just simply Google NASA Artemis 3, and what you'll get there, you'll get the page. That'll the first one that comes up will take you directly to the NASA Artemis 3 page, where you can find just a plethora of information about this. And this image I thought was really awesome. This is the Artemis 3 service module, and it's a European build module. So Artemis 3 European service module for this. I want to include this as well in here. So, super excited about this as well, as we, take to the lunar surface, but we have to do this docking testing in the orbits. So one other thing I want to mention here, which is really important with the GLOBE program, introducing the Globe Cup Challenge. If you haven't seen this or haven't been to the GLOBE website in a little bit, starting in 2 days is the World Cup, but then also we are having something called the Globe Cup Challenge. And this isn't, I shouldn't say we as in the Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign. This is a Globe Program Challenge. And this runs for the length of the World Cup from June 11th to July 19th. And we're going to be, basically piggybacking off of the Globe Cup, where we're going to have regional teams where you can join one. As you can see, the different regions for Africa, Asia, and Pacific. Europe and Eurasia, Latin America and Caribbean, North America, and Near East and North Africa. And basically what we want you to do is to take observations using these three major globe protocols: air temperature, surface temperature, and land cover during this time frame, during the World Cup for this Globe Cup Challenge. And the folks at Globe also have a bonus in here. They want to include your soccer ball or football, okay, in your down photo so we can see where the world plays. So I think this is really cool. And I added this link at the bottom. You can learn more about the Globe Cup Challenge. I added a tiny URL because sometimes, as you know, with the Globe program, the URLs can be very, very long, and this would have expanded, off the slide or gotten way too small to actually see. But I'll put these all in the chat a little later on so you can check these out. But also, kicking off this Globe Cup Challenge, we will be having the next Globe Observer Connect event on Thursday as well. And this will be at 12 p.m. Eastern Time or 1600 UTC. And we will be having Dr. Eric Brown de Colston, who is a NASA scientist at the Goddard Space Flight Center, and Dr. Kevin Chikowski at the University of Toledo. Many of you know Dr. Kevin Chikowski, or Dr. C. And, he has been running the surface temperature field campaign for a while out of the University of Toledo. And many of you might remember Dr. Eric Brown de Colston. He was actually part of our Trees Around the Globe student research campaign early on. He would pop in here and there as a subject matter expert. He presented a couple times early on in the first couple years of the campaign. So you can learn more about this Globe Observer Connect event on Thursday, and you can register there. There is a link to register for it. And once you go in and register just with your name and your email, you will get information on how to connect to it at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time or 1600 UTC on Thursday, this Thursday, the 11th of June. So make sure you come check that out. And then, once Thursday comes, start taking your observations of air temperature, surface temperature, and land cover. So super excited to get that started in a couple days. So, if you're watching the World Cup from wherever you are, also remember the Globe Cup Challenge is happening at the same time. All right. So last, before I introduce Peter, I like to, and the C students, I like to always start off with a couple, inspirational quotes here. And there's a big separation of, these quotes from in time. But Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, a Nerva Antonine dynasty, said, "Nothing has such power to broaden the mind as the ability to investigate systematically and truly all that comes under thy observation in life." Okay. It's a really, really ancient way to, look at observation and research, right? And then fast forward to, the present day, to Hillary Mason, American entrepreneur and data scientist, co-founder of Fast Forward Labs in Hack NY, or New York. Data is a tool for enhancing tuition. Pretty simple, but pretty prophetic, right? Very, very good quote there. Since we're talking about, observation, we're talking about, doing research for publication is what we're talking about today with this journal article. A lot of this, the data that Peter is going to talk about, the data that went into, the data that went into writing these articles is just enhancing, the knowledge we have, of our planet, of local environments, to understanding our global picture. So with that said, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot the metrics. I always have the metrics here. Here's our campaign countries. Here we have our measurements. Direct your attention as usual down to year 8. We are at almost 23,000 measurements from almost 6,500 global sites for year 8, which began on the 1st of October of 2025. And all the way at the bottom here, you can see we have 272,703 observations from 82,002 global sites. And that is as of about 3 hours ago when I did some data metrics analysis. And we have over 134 campaign webinars from 94 of the monthly webinars, plus 40 special webinars. And then we still have 82 blogs with closing in on 400,000 views. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to our own Peter Nelson. As a reminder, he is a senior instructor and a senior faculty research assistant at the Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon. And he is going to lead our featured presentation for today. And this is the Journal of Earth Observation and Geospatial Applications. And this is a special issue from April 2026. And this is best practice. This is the same title that we have for the webinar today that you saw on the shareable as well. Best practices and research work from the STEM Enhancement in Earth Sciences, or SEAS, summer intern program supported by NASA. So, like I said, I don't want to steal any more thunder. So, Peter, I'm going to stop sharing and go ahead and take it away.
Well, thanks for all the bringing the clouds in, Brian, so that I can crash some thunder with some
Yep.
loud talking and noise here. To me, what is a really exciting topic, and this it really kind of goes into not just our doing of science that we've been talking about, or that we do primarily in the GLOBE program, mainly focused on gathering measurements, right? And so this opportunity to talk about how we actually share our science out is what we want to be, our conversation for today. And it's sort of wrapped around this NASA program that is run out of the University of Texas at Austin, and we many of us have provided projects for interns to be able to work on. And when I say interns, I really think of early career scientists, right? And really here we want to talk about the culture of doing earth science. And what's exciting is that through this we've been able to experiment, we've been able to collect data, and through this we've been able to better connect our globe observer or globe measurements to our satellite data. And so, so this iterative process has led to some of these journal articles and the methods that we've been able to work on. And so you can learn a little bit more about this program here, what it's been doing as a NASA Science Activation Program. And this is just one of those opportunities. But to me, if you have an 8-week research opportunity, this is kind of the really great type of experience that somebody can have if they want to learn a little bit about remote sensing. You can see that one of the ways that the participants share their knowledge is through a YouTube channel. So you can actually go here, and I will drop this into the chat so that everybody can get to that and actually see what students did last year. And they go through and they get 5 minutes to do their presentation. So you can actually see right here is that whole global surface temperature protocol and measurements. My guess is they might have been out on a soccer field. That's one of our calibration places that we talk a lot about. So you can see that there's a lot of different projects that students have worked on, including things like all of our type of data, geospatial type of data. And so if you want to learn a little bit more and actually hear the voices of some of these authors, you can actually find some of them in here. And let me pull up my chat here so that I can actually drop that link right in there so that you can go off and watch and learn a little bit more about what are some current research questions that NASA is really interested in, or that some of the students have really shown some interest in. And so I want to take us back to what we've been doing here with the GLOBE program as a support. Remember that part of science is actually sharing our data, and how we do that is through a database. And to me, that's one of those really important functions of the GLOBE program. It's the protocols that help us do things together in the same way, but it's also having a place where we can actually share and allow each other to research our initial questions. Okay. And that is a really important part because that's where a lot of us can actually pick up. And it's part of that science process. It's not just doing our initial measurements, but it's actually helping each other develop those methods, helping us figure out how do we actually display this and interpret and show the data so that it's clear to others. And to me, that's one of these things that, in fact, when you make a graph, you are going to be sort of testing it in terms of how it is understood by others. You might put it in front of somebody else and they might reject the way that you created your color scheme. That's also part of this science process. So I just want you to recognize that, it doesn't end here with this communicating conclusions, actually. It really, the conclusions there are really to help the next people come along and research what you've done. And when we talk about trees, something that are long lived, you're probably not going to be the only one that measures those trees. So that to me is a really important aspect about the science process, about searching for answers, making measurements, and then making sure other people understand what you did so that they can get similar or repeat your process. Okay, so we'll keep this in mind because when we think about what we're doing as teams, this is to be one of these processes. It's part of our science method here. Okay. And so when we think about how we share our information out, just remember that you want to acknowledge all of that hard teamwork that came before you. That set up the data that allowed you to actually research something that somebody else has done. And teams are just kind of one way that we organize ourselves. But I just kind of want to highlight that this is a really important way that we do our science. And so just kind of recognize that everything that we do is citable. In other words, you should be telling us where you got that data from or where you stored that data. Okay. And all of this goes into what we want to talk about, which is open science. And open science is a way of doing science. And the key here is that we want things to be traceable. So we want to know who's doing what. We also want to know how they're doing it. What's the software? What is the data that they're using? What are the methods? What's the hardware? All of these things go into what we're doing. And so, that's one of these really important things that we have within the Globe structure already. So if you are using Globe tools, you can actually really help us, move forward into the current science that's happening. And just out of curiosity to get a little interaction here, let's say a show of hands of how many people have heard about AI or this this way of doing science called artificial intelligence. And you can give a reaction. All right, Brian, that's good. I would hope that you're in the know. How many other people have heard about AI? All right. Thank you. We got at least a couple other people. I want to really stress here. This is the computer machine that we've been teaming up with for 50 years as we do remote sensing science, NASA type of science. It's really nothing new. The key is that it's different software and it requires different hardware and it requires us to put our data together in particular ways. And so, this to me is one of the things that this group of students were really helping us to understand with their articles is how do we actually transform our globe data into something that can be used with these AI software or the needs and the information that they require to be able to use those tools. So I want to emphasize that because, this doesn't just happen. It requires a lot of iteration. And some of these students have actually, or early career scientists have graduated from different parts of their training. But I want to encourage everybody to think about this phase that we're in. And don't get scared by this word AI, because in essence, it's really just powerful software. And I want to, before we go into the exact topics, I want to, say that there's the whole scientific community is talking about how do we actually bring together the computational power or computing power, the ability to do math or lots of data analysis with citizen science data. And so this actually takes us right back to why Globe was created in the mid 1990s, was for this convergence or bringing together computing power. The internet at the time was the connector, but the computing power and the databases that allow us to get new insights. And so, so one of the things that I want you to be thinking about today as we go through our conversation, and I'm going to zoom in just a little bit on this so it's a little bit bigger for us. Um, but we have some unique moments and priorities here right now that in 5 years might be different, or it hopefully will be solved, if you will. But I want to, emphasize that we're still learning how do we actually interact between the computers and the software and the data and our questions. Remember that humans are driving this. And we are the ones that are asking the questions. And so, we need feedback. How are these current ways of interacting with globe data, for instance, or satellite data working for you? This is where our conversation today, we want to hear from you all about what's working, what's not. Because this is where we can actually, as a community, build systems and take this knowledge that we're sharing and actually build into the future. Okay. And to me, that's really important because our data is an asset. It's something we can't actually recreate. And so all of these people who put in effort and time to not only collect data, but to also describe it and to analyze it, are part of us actually making that time and effort worth something and worth the time and effort beyond just even the initial collection. Okay, so I want to, move us and get us thinking about where we're going and some of these future recommendations, because that to me is where some of the best practices that were presented in this particular special issue are really giving us some insights into this infrastructure. How do we actually work with the data across scale, global scale, or across 30 years of time or 50 years of time? How do we keep that going into the future? I also want to really highlight, this idea that it's important to recognize that what we're doing today is laying the foundation for what we'll do in the future. And so it's really important for us to not keep this information to ourselves, but to find ways of sharing it out. And hopefully it's not just one person sharing it out like me, but it's hopefully people like me who are, and Brian and Peter, who are opening up and providing you all some space to share with us what is happening in your areas. And to me, how is the community, the human community, and maybe even non-human community, interacting with this machine and the computing technology that we have out there? There's a lot of things that really have to be demonstrated still. Okay, but that all leads us into, to me, the really fun and exciting parts of what we're doing, right? And this is us working at global scale. And this is where I want to just acknowledge that this was built for most of us. And so again, making sure that things are citable are really important. And so make sure that you are reading user guides and you are understanding how to make your data and your process traceable. Okay, so I want to really kind of stress where our research and what we wanted to explore with this large group of people over the last 6 years is really here and looking at all of the different ways that a single location can be described. And this is where, it used to be that our science was putting all of this data together. And in fact, now we have so much data available to us for one place that we need to flip around how we're thinking about that. And that leads us into ways that we can actually evaluate these different science products. And so all of these products are coming from map producers. And so we'll use this term a lot today because when you see surface water extent, that's coming from a map producer. And and why not use that if it's available and if it describes our area? It might help us with this floodwater assessment or various things like that. And so you've seen over the last 8 years in our campaign, we've highlighted a lot of different data sets, a lot of people who are creating those data sets. And so, this is a great place to just start out and see how is your location, your world being described through other people and their understanding or how they're working with machines to give us understanding and insights. Okay, so you can go through and you can find all kinds of interesting things. And and here what I want to switch to is talking a little bit about how we actually do this evaluation, how we link up our ground measurements to that satellite data behind it. And so here, at this new, relatively new journal, we're only in issue 2. Um, you can see that this is an opportunity and a scholarly journal that is peer reviewed. And so I want to talk about what this idea of who's a peer when we talk about peer review, because we you hear that this is the gold standard or the thing that we should all be striving for. And I want to emphasize that whenever you turn to somebody else and you ask them to review your work, you are doing a peer review. Um, this idea of a peer is somebody who actually understands the domain, the area, the methods, the things that we're doing, the things that you did. Hopefully, they understand some of the jargon, if you will, and things like Earth observation or even the word geospatial applications, right? So we're looking for people who you don't have to describe every single little detail, but there is a level of base understanding. So it's not just anybody that should be considered a peer, when we talk about peer review. But I'm going to reach out to Brian Campbell here and ask, Brian, you've done written some articles and gone through this peer review process. So, from your standpoint, how is that different than, say, submitting to the Globe Virtual Science Symposium?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, with the peer review, so what we've done with some of the articles, and after the presentation, I'll show you some example. I have some examples of some articles that I've been part of, and that you've been part of, Peter, and some others. So yeah, so what we've done, once we worked on the paper, we had our authors all get together and work on this and make sure everything's scientifically sound, the observations are good, everything's flowing properly, and then it gets sent to the journal, and the peers are selected through a pretty substantial process, to, as you mentioned, Peter, align to, um, their expertise, their subject matter expert, their researchers in, they know the information that's in the paper, they know that field of study or of research. So then, they go through the papers, with a fine tooth comb, and, they come back with, if they think and it's a rare thing that their paper is, ready to go as it is. You will get, information back where, for review, where there's edits involved, whether it's, minor edits, major edits, where there's minor weaknesses, major weaknesses that all have to be addressed before, so you have to get back with your author team. All that has to be addressed before you can resubmit it to the peer group, to the journal, which again goes back to the peer group again to make sure all of this has been addressed, significantly, before it can be reconsidered for, publication. So it's a pretty arduous process between, when you're writing the paper, it goes to the journal, it goes to the peers, where, as I mentioned, where they go through it, pretty heavily, with a fine tooth comb, looking at, everything specifically, make sure everything flows perfectly. The science is there. The science is valid. The paper makes sense. It makes sense in the science world. It can be understood. The topic is, everything in the article is relevant. It all fits together. So then it can go through, I've had papers, where I've authored where it's gone through, one or two iterations, but I've had other ones where we've edited 10 times before it goes. And that can be a long, long process as well. So, sometimes papers go through quickly. Sometimes papers take a long time, can be several years with the peer review process. So yeah, it's a pretty arduous process, finding those peers that are there to, that have that expertise, but then, going through that to make sure, when that paper goes out to the public world, to the research world, that everything is, perfect in that paper.
Yeah. And thanks for that, Brian. I mean, that whole thing about timing, again, goes back to some of these things that I want to sort of stress, that led us into how we structured our time. And to me, this is really important one of the things that we can all do is go, if you're interested in publishing to a certain audience, go find that journal, and usually there will be this for authors, or information about how to submit. I want to really stress that it's not always having to be a research article. There's all kinds of other ways of having communication with the community of peers, of scientists, or who we're talking to. And so yes, research is one of those big things that we talk a lot about here. And again, I want to highlight this word research. Right. So somebody has to put an initial search out there and describe it. And then other people will have to research that, right? And so this is one way that we actually communicate that process going through. And I also want to stress this idea of best practices refers to this moment in time, because technology changes, science questions changes in relation to this research, right? And so we should always be looking at towards things like this to look for best practices. And that's really what we ended up really putting forward, is some best practices, and not necessarily research results. And part of that is because for me, a lot of the research articles by themselves hide some of this intermediary decision making process. So to me, how you get to the point where you decide that's the color, or that's the graph, and that's the way I'm going to present that. That's actually really useful for a lot of us who are trying to research that article. And so don't think about only presenting finished results. Actually help us with that process that you're going through to understand how to do science communication. Okay. And I want to stress here that when you click on like this for authors, this leads into, sometimes that scope is defined for you. So make sure that you're using these keywords in your discussion or what you're doing, right? And make sure that you are putting papers and you are actually fulfilling the conversation scope that these authors want to have. And this is where you can spend a lot of time, and you want to spend time because you want to be talking to the right audience. Otherwise, you might just get rejected, like Brian was saying right off the bat. Um, the other things that I want you to sort of stress or think about is this idea of permission and how your data or how this can and should be used. And this leads into maybe why you might publish in one place or share your information in one place versus another one. Okay. And so these are all considerations that you might even be doing right up front. And that again sort of leads into how you might prepare or how you might manage your time. Right. So again, special opinions or opinions are really useful. Reviewing the literature or the data that's out there is really, really useful. Here again, this best practices of helping us to understand challenges or what you've learned in your landscape help us to understand where we need to put our resources and time. So these are all really useful pieces in addition to what we typically talk about, research objectives, the methods, the results, the discussion, conclusions, all of those things that you are usually doing in a poster already. Right. And so here, what I want to really stress that this particular journal, for all of us, you can download a manuscript preparation zip file. And this gives you a template that walks you through how to make a scientific article. And I found this to be really, really useful in the preparation because of the way that they put it together. Not every journal or a group of papers will do that as nicely for you. The other thing that you should always be watching out for is how much will it cost you to share your information with this audience. And this is something where open access might be something you hear about, and this goes into this idea of open science. How you share your information and is something that's really, really important, and it's not free. Right. These things, websites cost something to maintain, power, making sure that there's a plan for longevity. All of these things are not free. And I want to stress that. And that's part of our science infrastructure that we share amongst each other and as a group. And so recognize that that's one of these roles that we're paying for as when you are actually submitting to some of these journals. And so sometimes it can be really, really expensive. And by expensive, I'm talking thousands of dollars or thousands of euros. It can be really expensive, and this can be very prohibitive. And so, this is a role that we can play here in our campaign, is helping you to figure out how to share those results so that they can be done in the long term and have it so that it can be researchable. Right. I think one of the things that we've highlighted more recently that is always a big challenge is making sure that you archive your information so that somebody else can actually do the same thing over again. And that's part of why the Globe database exists. But I also want to stress that this is why we also have community databases out there. And so one that we've highlighted that you can use, and you should be able to find these out there, is a place called Zenodo. And this, if you actually just go in and type for globe, here's where you can actually find a variety of information. And it's not always related to what you want, right? But you can actually find things archived like the globe eclipse data. You can also find a lot of other data that might be useful in your researching. And so recognize that when you publish and share your methods and read somebody else's methods, one of the things you want to be able to find is the data or the information about that. Right. And so that is really a new transformative way we're doing our science, is not just writing about it, but also sharing the data that you used for that data set. So somebody doesn't have to go through the Globe database to find everything. And so that's just a really important part of what we're doing. And that was, so when we talk about our articles here that are being published, we're also publishing just the data sets and saying this is what we collected. We haven't analyzed it yet, but here is the data set that we have collected. And so when Brian at the beginning of these webinars goes over all of the data that we've been collecting, this is part of why we're trying to do that, is because just going through and describing data sets is a very important process in our science right now. So there's a lot of ways of sharing information and helping you to have a conversation with the rest of us who can maybe help guide you and help you to do some of that problem solving, and help you get to the point where when you are making some conclusions or statements in an article like this, you are as confident as you can be. That's our goal here. Okay, so I want to bring in someone here, because one of the things that about this particular issue that I'm going to click on and show that you may not have really thought too much about, but it's part of our science process, and gives us maybe something a little different than a different product than, again, just the papers. Now, one of the things that we did end up wanting to talk about is not just, the collection of papers and who's in there and that kind of thing, but how do we actually advertise or get people's attention about what we're talking about in this collection of articles? And so here I want to introduce one of our early career scientists here, who actually wasn't part of the SEAS program specifically, but they were doing some other research and were working on their own adopt a pixel land cover research, and so wanted I asked, hey, do you have anything that can help us convey what we're doing? And so this is the article or the artwork that they came up with. And so I want to bring in Alyssa here to discuss a little bit about your artistic science process here, and give us a little bit of background about what you were doing and kind of how you came to do the artwork for the cover art of this special issue. Oh, wait, hold on. Looks like, of course, your microphone is not working, or or maybe I'm not hearing it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's perfect now.
Okay. Of all the times, per usual. Hey everyone, my name is Alyssa Tyndale. Thank you, Peter, especially for letting me know that my microphone was not working. I am currently a student at OSU. I am an eCampus student. And I would say last December, I was looking at doing some undergraduate research because I'm interested in going to graduate school. And lo and behold, I found the Adopt a Pixel research, the URSA, and working with Peter, we sat back and I realized that a lot of the research, the citizen science, all of this together is really what I'm interested in, and eventually, transitioning out of the career I'm in now to work like this. And so what you're looking at is a piece of a pixel from Acadia National Park in Maine. And originally I was living in Maine, just relocated back to North Carolina. And so really where my inspiration came from was Last summer, I had visited Acadia National Park, and it was really interesting because before I even knew about all of this research and the science and whatnot going on, I was on the way down to a section called Bass Harbor, and it's a lighthouse. And when I was walking down there, there was this uh, the national park sign, like a notice with, tape blocking it off that people couldn't walk back there. And at the time, I couldn't read it because it was really, really small. I took a picture thinking, I wonder why they blocked that off. But I could see that it had been, most of it around it was treed area and some spots were bare. So just kind of got me thinking, I wonder what's going on. So I went out, took a picture, went down. Ooh, this is cool. Later on, I started reading the picture. I had to zoom in, and it was showing that they were going to be doing work on that area to bring back more trees and grasses and whatnot, because over time, people had been cutting through and making their own trail. So that was kind of what started to get me thinking about, I wonder how much, I mean, not even just in that area, right, but across the globe, that these areas happen that we don't realize what we're looking at is due to human error or so on and so forth. So when you're looking at this particular pixel, all of this came from going to Bass Harbor. I ended up choosing 2 pixels. One was the Welcome Center, which is 30 minutes away from this section of Acadia National Park. And so right now, what you can see is my kind of confidence, right, of what I'm looking at. And when I was looking at this, you go through different versions of imagery from satellites. And specifically, I was toggling between was a Mapbox and the NDVI, right? And when I was talking with Peter about the pixel, we could see on the map that you could tell it's kind of pretty looking, right? Like you can see I did a pretty fairly well job of telling what was trees, what was bare, and what was water. But when I looked at this, I looked at the issue before, and I told Peter, I really want this to pop. I want people to be able to look at this in a way of somebody in this field would, and you're not going to look at it in a static way of just one layer on a map, right? Like you're going to have to toggle between them. And so then became, how do we make this pixel look more than just some dots on this layer? And so, I really liked this particular layer because, as you can tell, typically you think of trees and whatnot, and they're green and the water's blue. But in my opinion, looking at this, it really catches your attention in a different way of, okay, I have a general idea of what I'm looking at, but also what am I looking at? I can clearly see there's water. And on top of that, you don't realize that when you're working on these things, how important it is to adjust the size of these dots, right? These individual pixels of their own, the 37 of them, and the coloring as well, because that was another thing. I didn't want this to be harsh. When we're looking at this, we want to appreciate the map layer as we see it, but also complement it with the colors of each pixel, each dot. And so it took a lot of time, a lot of hours, because as anybody here knows, right, as you start to work on ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Pro, you're telling yourself, okay, this looks good, but I can go a little further. I can go a little further. I can go a little further. And then eventually it came to a point where I was like, all right, I'm proud of what I'm putting out, and that counts, that matters. And so really, at the end of the day, I wanted to make it to where you can see how beautiful that layer is. You can see the colors complement the color scheme of that layer, but also, you have these slightly translucent, dots to where you can kind of see where the differences are. And then you have these black dots. And the concept behind that was, we're still working through the confidence of it, right? Of of when you're going through and you're looking at each section and you're not sure. So really the point of all this was, okay, most of those had been completed and been reviewed, and those with the black dots, I hadn't gone to that section quite yet to review it.
Excellent. I really, to me, there's so much, decision making behind what we're seeing right here. And Alyssa, like one of the things that, describe to me a little bit about like, well, one, what are we even looking at, right? Like, you kind of mentioned something about scale, right? Like, and so, because the cover art, it's literally called art, right? How did you kind of think about this versus maybe like a science graphic that you were doing? Oh, you muted, or try
Oh,
that again.
here we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, definitely.
Things when I'm sitting back, it doesn't like that. So I'm not going to do that anymore. So when I was looking at this, my thought was, again, like it's a visual thing, right? I love to read, but what's really going to pull someone aside from that first line of a journal typically is your visual. What are you looking at? And so this right here is a small section next to where the lighthouse is. And it's just this little small coastline. Obviously, I mean, I'm not sure. Hopefully, people could tell you can't really reach this area directly because then you're kind of getting where you're not allowed to go. But I wanted to be able to focus in enough where you could see enough of the water, right? And enough of the water that you can tell it's water, but also part of that land. When I was looking at it, I didn't want it to be perfect. I wanted it to zoom into a section where, very much like Earth, right? When you're looking at it, you're not always going to get this perfectly centered image on there. And really, that kind of reminded me of when you are working through the confidence section of it, right? It's not giving you this perfect section to review, it's just throwing an image at you, and you've got to go from there. So that was kind of my mentality of why I chose this section versus, like a graphic and whatnot. Because again, we can look at a graphic, and for somebody that's reading this, especially early career, right, they might not understand what the technicalities and the terms are, but you're looking at a picture and you're saying, well, I can kind of get an idea of what this is. I want to learn more about this. And really, we talked about scale. Scale is just as important because that was also something that I took a long time to toggle in between, because I wanted it enough to where you could see land around it, you could see water around it, but enough to where the pixels weren't being they weren't so small to where you couldn't necessarily tell what you were looking at, but not too close to where you're cutting some of the pixels off, because that was kind of the point of all of this, right? The adopt a pixel, pick a pixel. I wanted my entire section to show right there, but also enough detail to where, honestly, this is about the level that you look at when you are reviewing it, and how at the end of the day, citizen science is so important because I could go into a whole nother section of this, of the data and how different each pixel was, but you look at this and shadows can play into this, or the bareness of the ground, or in this case, if you can look at it, you see some of the blue dots where my confidence was water. It's not technically inaccurate, it just happened to be the time of the day. And that was everything that I wanted to capture in this. About, it's not so much wrong as it is there's so many variables, and you should be able to look at that and realize that it's not just this large picture, but it's always getting down to the nitty gritty and how close you can get to really appreciate what you're looking at.
Yeah, and I really like that because you ended up, whether you sort of planned on it or not. Alyssa, did you know any of, or did you read any of these articles before you came up with this, or was it, what was sort of that connection even, to these other things that came afterwards?
No, so actually, I hadn't, I knew afterwards, after, me and you had this discussion about, you said, listen, we've got these articles coming out, this journal, I really like, your methods that are going into this, and, asking me if I'd be interested to have, my pixel there on the cover. But prior to that, I mean, I was as green. I mean, I was essentially an infant of all of this, right? Like, it just was a matter of, starting from that undergraduate research and evolving into something I've always known I wanted to be in, a field that was scientific of sources and sorts, and conservation and things like that. And so I had no idea going into this that all of this was going to kind of tie together. Really, I would say this was more of, once I started doing the research, was really, I was already interested, obviously, but really a lot more questions started coming to me of, what really goes into this? How much work goes into this? And it really wasn't until I was immersed in it did I realize that, you know, it's definitely not easy to write a paper, but you don't realize just how much work also goes on the other side of the technicality of it. And that's not just the written portion, the research portion, but a portion like this where, if you are, let's say, presenting this, you want to be able to give the audience something that is going to capture their attention. So I really had no idea what, if I was going to be producing something that was going to be helpful. But when I had talked to Peter about this, I said, what I'm going to show you, I'm happy with. I'm satisfied with the work that I'm putting forth. And in my opinion, if I'm proud of it, I believe hopefully people will appreciate it and the time that I've spent on this. And now that I have since read the articles in the journal, I can appreciate, how it all just falls together.
Yeah. And I really, appreciate that, Alyssa, because you like you said, you're actually sort of researching the methods that these students or early career scientists applied in some other places. So what's great about that I really like about this story is that you are at a different stage, even though they might be younger technically in age, but you're able to work together. And I really actually love the fact that you weren't done with your labeling, which is why this is a great article, or a great cover, is because you are sort of at the very beginning stages of where the articles sort of come in. And as I want to ask you about something too, because we talk about peer review of what's inside of this. But give us a little understanding of how you did peer review of this cover article, of this cover, because you didn't just do this on your own and then submit it and say, "Okay, I'm done," right? There was actually some peer review of this artwork, right?
My best friend, he is a graphic designer. And so, when I had this general idea, right, I had already chosen the layer that I wanted for it. I had already, had a pretty good idea of colors and even the size of it. But I thought at the end of the day, I've never claimed to be an artist. That's not my forte. The goal is to be a scientist, not an artist, because that's just what I'm better at. And so I reached out to him and I said, hey, listen, you have the eye for this. I'm going to be working on submitting this. And I feel like something is missing. Like, something tells me there's something slightly off. And would you mind taking a look at this and just giving me some feedback on it? And so immediately, he told me, yeah, you've got really good idea with the color schemes, but I would change this hex code to this one, right? Or I actually would adjust, I would make it slightly more translucent so you can kind of see a little bit more show up from underneath the layer through the pixel. And, he said, I would also slightly, again, because it wasn't as simple as I'm just choosing the section and going with it. It was a lot of even toggling of where I wanted it to be. And at that point, it was actually a little bit more to the right, that pixel. And he said, I would move it a little bit more to the left so you can also appreciate the pixels, but you can see the landscape. And so, you know, I took that feedback and that was it. Like that was exactly what I needed. I thought, man, that he helped me get this pixel from where I was solid 95% confident to 100% of this is really what I had in my head. I just couldn't necessarily get there. And again, I mean, really, this takes a team, right? Of between the journals that are in here and the cover art, all of this comes back to people working together. And if that isn't the center of the research at the end of the day, I don't know what is.
And I really, for me, one of the things is usually it ends up costing you more money as an author to actually publish in color. So again, when you are when we're all reading these journal articles and looking at why they're presented the way that they are, cost actually is one of those barriers sometimes to actually presenting things in the way that we want to. And so Alyssa, for me that was an opportunity actually on the front here was to lean into the color space that we have in remote sensing, the colors that of the world that we're trying to map. And so so I really appreciate the approach that you took to really kind of our one color artwork that really conveyed a lot. And as Brian sort of mentioned, in the comments there, we both of us, talked about how we want this to hook people in and make them go, huh, I wonder what they're going to talk about inside of here. And so there was a lot that actually went into a single piece that may not be appreciated in the same scientific way that some of the contents are, but you can see we spent a lot of time thinking about this and iterating through and hopefully making it something that would grab your attention so that all of the interior work from all of these other authors would actually catch the attention. And I think that's something that I kind of want to stress that I think is, again, one of these things that is a great opportunity, that it's not just about writing things down and presenting work that way, but how important it is to have something graphically like this to initially grab somebody's attention so that they'll pay attention to all of those other details that are important, but maybe glossed over when we take artistic liberties, right? And maybe emphasize color in a way that is informative, but really when we come back to it, it's those labels. What do those colors really mean on the landscape, right? And I'll just say I really appreciate this, from our trees around the globe kind of lens, because it highlights some of the things that we've really wanted to emphasize. And to me, the difference between the one red, the pink red, and the texture and the colors that we have in the tree space, again, is something that we do end up getting going into a little lower down. And for me, that shadow piece is really so important to helping us to identify trees versus other vegetation. And so I really like this, and the process behind it is to me really helpful, because again this led us into a lot of questions or a lot of other conversations, right, Alyssa, about, well, what are we seeing here? Why are we seeing it? How much of this area needs to be one thing to get a label, right? And so there was actually quite a bit of where a photo or an image like this really led us down into clarifying some of the science that we were doing together with that. So I really, for me, I really appreciated that, a better understanding the process, and then the color space is great too, because like you said, having all all the different colors of blue and not just a solid blue or a solid red. The gradations of colors were also, to me, this great opportunity that we have by bringing in digital data like this. So I think you did a great job, kind of doing something slightly different, but in our science space. And like I said, to me, this is an opportunity where a lot of other people can maybe on their way to their science visuals, stop along the way and really, spend a little bit of time trying to have a cover art like this. And Alyssa, I want to say that for me, the spatial arrangement of these things was really crucial, and it is something that we're trying to quantify as much as use to our advantage here. And so I like those adjustments that you made to the balance of the work and the colors as well with all of this. So I think those little suggestions and then you following them, because again, when you get peer review, doesn't mean that you actually have to follow what they're telling you, right? And so I think that to me is a really good demonstration of how something like this gets developed. And if we think about all of the figures that go into supporting the text, you can see how long we've spent just talking about one, right? And this is just where are we in the world survey kind of piece of things. So Alyssa, I want to ask you, because you did, allude to you were doing some undergraduate research with this, but I guess prepared were you, or what skills did you actually bring into this? Because like you kept mentioning like you're new to this, but I don't quite believe that, right? Like you brought in a lot of skills to this, and so you describe a little bit about how your diverse background helped you to even think about composing something like this.
Right. And so to begin with, I'm already a non-traditional student. So like I mentioned, I'm e-campus, I have a family. I work full time, right? I've been in a career that I've been in for about 10, 12 years. And so, some of this stuff kind of comes with the dedication and the tools that I've learned over the years. But then on the other side of it, I've always wanted to, my dream, even when I was a kid, was to be a scientist. I didn't know what kind. I just knew I wanted to be in sciences. And so, really, going back and finishing my degree was really to pay homage to younger Alyssa and say, we're going to get there. It doesn't matter how old you are or where you're at, right? So, there's kind of that, and I always knew as time was going on, I really was interested in GIS type work, maps, kind of looking at elevations and really even canopy views and satellites and things of that nature. So I am currently senior standing. So, one thing that I really liked, I've liked so far, especially with OSU, was the opportunity to take a lot of classes that really fit the interest and given me the opportunity to grow into that because a lot of the classes I had been taking in the last two terms were geared towards working on ArcGIS Pro, right? So as I started having assignments in there, I knew anybody obviously that's worked in ArcGIS Pro, what it's an awesome tool, but really a lot of that stuff you don't know about until you kind of learn about it. And so, I found a lot of the assignments I was doing were with one tool or that, and I knew I was getting more interested in it. And so I started teaching myself more on my own time. And then I started wondering how can I apply some of this stuff to maybe things within my community that they need. And so, for instance, at the time, like I mentioned, I was living in Maine and I was just kind of curious about, living in a coastal state like that, how much hurricanes or rainwater will affect certain areas. So, on my own time, I started working on ways to create maps of flood areas in the state of Maine and also Vermont because that's one of its neighbors. And some of that was to give back to the community, but most of that was teaching myself, right? And just taking the initiative because I wanted to be able to give myself an edge and say, well, I may not have the work in this field per se in an actual job, right? Because again, I have a whole separate career, but I've been teaching myself and learning. And so, when I realized that I could do the undergraduate research, my goal was I want to find a project also that was going to challenge me, but also continue to help me learn these tools that I knew I was going to be working with or hopefully be working with. And so, some of it I was exposed to already with classwork. Other things of it, I just kind of did my own research and started teaching myself. Like for instance, with this cover, I've never written a research paper, and that's actually what we're working on now. So kind of doing it maybe backwards, some may say, right? Normally maybe you start with a paper, but really that was even more got me thinking of, we look at something like that and we don't realize that there even is a science even to the artistic portion of that. Because I have to be honest, I mean, Peter knew this. I was extremely anxious. I was worried. I thought, how do I get my research to show on this? And here we are, right? In my opinion, you can see it. You can see there's research there, there's questions to be asked. And like Peter mentioned, that it was interesting when you're looking at something like this, you don't think that it's going to lead to as many questions as it did. And sure enough, it actually ended up that the data between the two pixels was uh, pretty much night and day. And really, that led to even more questions. So, a lot of this going into it, I would say I had um, some experience, but overall, in terms of this as a whole. I'm still very new to it. Obviously, I love it, and you can't get me out of it now. And my goal is to continue, to push forward and see just how much more we can learn about this. And not just that, but comparing even my data to everybody around me and seeing what other, you know, questions comes out of that data.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that, Alyssa, because, again, these are kind of like opportunities of the moment, right? And I wanted to, go down and give everybody a little sense for what's actually inside of this. Now that we've got, that how do we get people's attention? Piece of things. I think, one of the things that I really appreciated about all of this is that we're hearing from different communities around the country, around the United States in particular, because that's who was participating. But I want to encourage everybody here to look into the best practices because they are suggesting ways to improve using Globe Observer, how to gather those on the ground photos, like inspired Alyssa, right? A lot of times, having just a photo like that on the ground can lead to a lot of these other questions, right? And so that to me is where having this archive of photos of what is this moment in time, can actually support people who come along later. And so it's a really easy way of supporting science and contributing to opportunities by simply using the tool and gathering that initial data. And a couple of the things that I wanted to really kind of stress inside of here, is that we really focus on a very small area because through time it gets really complex and really dense and you have a lot of options and things to think about with that. And so that's the other piece that I want to stress. When we're thinking about trees and trees around the globe, all of these the editors, that was a lot of the feedback that we were getting is just can you add more graphics? Can you really help us to understand this immense amount of data easier? Can you provide us with this matrix or this confusion thing? And so they kept giving us new ways that we could keep expanding our research. And we had to keep pushing back and saying, no, we want to really just make sure that we're helping people understand our process and what we're finding is, in an urban environment versus a suburban environment, versus an area where we're actually looking at tidal areas and how those might be changing and not represented in the satellite data. And so I hope that these sort of initial research projects can spark and give other people elsewhere things to research, even if it's, you might end up with something different. But here, we've got some good data sets, some good methods that are using that globe data together with our science data or together with our remote sensing data to at least get some insights into what is happening there and how good is the data that we've been shown by experts like we've been talking about here and what we're actually finding on the ground. And so, so I'm not going to go through every single one of these because, that's one of the great things about having this written now is this can be a great place and for us to build off of with our research. And I want to encourage everybody to consider this as one journal that you can submit your all of your ideas to be part of the conversation. And you can see here the editorial board that is selecting and actually reviewing a lot of this are people who are well experienced in the field. And so one of the parts that was really helpful about this particular journal, why I really liked it for our audience, was that they actually provided good feedback to early career scientists. Not every journal will do that, and so that was something that I really appreciated about the time and effort that this group put in to help guide this particular special issue. That again was focused on globe data and remote sensing data in a way that rarely do we get to get this sort of attention all on similar methods, similar data, and really give us something that maybe you can replicate this upcoming summer. And that to me is one of these invitations that I wanted to take today. Again, is if you have submitted to the International Virtual Science Symposium or done any posters, you are steps away from archiving that and making it more understandable and researchable. Okay, so if you have any questions or want to go through this method and are unsure, that's what Brian, Peter, and myself are all here to help you through as you go through this process. I'm going to be leading another group of 50 C's interns this summer, and we're going to be researching and really trying to get through this full science cycle from data collection to poster creation and sharing it out in this peer-reviewed fashion. And the peer review, I want to emphasize, is really important because it allows us to have that feedback that gives us that credibility for our data and really gives us that next seal of we've done something that our community accepts and is something that they want to keep encouraging us to do. So as you are thinking about what you're doing with your science or how you fit into long-term monitoring of Earth, as Alyssa was sort of highlighting, these are the ways that we're doing that. And I want to just really kind of stress and go back that without us sharing our information together in all the ways, we're left with something like this. a map that or some understanding of the world, but not really deep insights. And so, just recognize that putting our data together is one of these first steps, and it gives us a lot to actually go through and start sharing with each other. And we now have 30 years of globe data that I hope we can keep building upon and not just focus on measuring things, but really focus on this other part of our science process. And so I'll just take us back that we've got a lot of these campaigns that are really good at getting us data. But let's, as a community, really kind of focus on sharing out, what we're doing and really working this full science process. And so, with that, Brian, I'm going to turn this back over so that we can wrap up our Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign webinar, where we really wanted to focus on this science communication and how do you set up the idea of research, and how do we make it easier for other classes or other students to come in, or other people to come in behind us and to do that research that we all talk about, but really relies on these sort of methods and ways of sharing our information out. And so I'm really excited about having, being able to share with you how we actually have done this, how we've gone through the peer review method. And I want to encourage everybody to try to get through that process. It's not easy, as Brian said. There's a lot more to it, but that is the opportunity that we have today with our open science methods and the way that we do science here using the Globe program.
All right. Thank you, Peter. That was amazing. And Alyssa, thank you for that as well. Yeah. Does anybody have any, I should mention, does anybody have any questions for either Peter or Alyssa for the presentation today? Feel free to unmute and ask a question or pop it in the chat.
Yes, and I was watching in the chat, and it didn't seem too much there. And so, again, I hope that this was inspiring to get you to that final step. And again, reach out to Brian, myself, or Peter as people who can help you do this. And even if you just do this, use this methodology in your classes, it is starting to develop those science practices. Again, we're not starting from scratch. And I think that was one of the things that helped, I'll just say, helped Alyssa realize that, it helped her to deal with some of that anxiety and stress of doing things for the first time. And so, just recognize that this is what we do here as a community, is encourage each other to take those steps, and don't be intimidated by your peers.
So, I'm going to end with this. Since we were talking about, since Peter was mentioning a lot about the peer-reviewed, journal articles and things like that, I just wanted to share just a couple examples of some of the papers. And the first one is interesting because this is a sole authorship I did on a peer-reviewed journal article, and this was part of the International Astronautical Federation that I presented at in 2019. And I submitted this to a journal called Acta Astronautica in 2019. Okay. As you can see, it wasn't published until 2021. And that wasn't because it had a ton of revisions that I needed to do, but there was something that happened around 2020 that caused this long delay. And that would have been the COVID pandemic. So that was another snag to this, because I submitted this. The conference was in October. As you can see, it's kind of hard to see up top there, but it was October 21 to 25 of 2019. I submitted this. I shouldn't say that. I submitted this around the end of November, beginning of December, to this journal, and then it took a while because once they had to find the peer reviewers, and of course there was a lot going on in the world during the COVID pandemic. So it basically the review lasted throughout the entire calendar year of 2020. And then eventually it was, I did get some revisions back. There were, some minor revisions that I needed to do. And then it came back and, it was published in 2021. And this was ICET2 and the Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign, looking at Earth's tree height, one tree at a time. And I have some links here. And don't worry about copying all these links down. And I'm not going to put them on the chat, but they will be listed under the webinar recording on our webinar page. I will include, all, as I always do, all the links that we had in the chat or on the presentation, on the slide deck. I will put all those under the webinar recording on the webinar page. So, don't fret. They'll all be there. And then another example is one that Peter was an author, and Cassie, who is with us today, Cassie Soving. So thank you for being here, Cassie. She was an author on this as well. Adopt the Pixel 3KM, a multi-scale data set linking remotely sensed land cover imagery with field-based citizen science observation. This is another one, in 2021. We have, should have gone to the next one. Go to the next one. No, there we go. Another one that Peter was an author as well, Globe Observer and the Go on a Trail Data Challenge, a citizen science approach to generating a global land cover land use reference data set. Another 2021 publication, peer-reviewed journal publication. Had another one in 2022, the potential of citizen science data to complement satellite and airborne LiDAR tree height measurements, lessons from the Globe program. I was an author on that. Several of our other colleagues that you may know, Holly Cole and Kristen Weaver, some other folks from the Globe program that you may remember, remember Dave Overroy. And then also we had a teacher that we are working with from Queens, New York, Deanna Donka. She was working with her math classes and her students. She was teaching trigonometry and having students go out and measure tree heights of a lot of the trees around her school in the city of Queens, New York in the United States. And then she was comparing them to the ICET2 tree height data from space. So we published that in 2022. And then the last one I have here for the examples, we had this journal article, peer-reviewed journal article, Review of Earth Observation Techniques and Citizen Science Approach for Biodiversity Hotspot. And this was a journal article that I co-authored with some of my colleagues in India, including Yashraj Patil, who some of you may know. He shows up in the webinars once in a while. He's a researcher and he's a professor in India. And then that was in 2024. And then 2025, I co-authored a paper with Dr. Soren Popescu and Miku Liu in use of Globe Observer citizen science data to validate continental scale canopy height maps derived from ICET2 and JEDI. And that was just last year. But all of these were peer reviewed, and all of these though had, I'm going to call it different wait times as far as getting the writing the papers. Some of them were more technologically advanced than others. A lot of them were more complicated than others. Some of them had more peer reviewers than others. Some had 2 peer reviewers. Some had 10. Some took several months. Some, as I mentioned, took well over a year and a half to get published as well. But with that said, even though I have all those URLs at the bottom, you can always go to, there's a Globe Publications page, and there's some search criteria you can put in there. You can search by, by sphere. You can search by, the science. You can search, if you want to look up tree height, if you want to look up land cover, if you want to look up, simply hydrosphere, you want to look up biosphere. You can search by author. Someone you may know in the Globe program, someone at NASA you may know as a co-author. You can search that way, and this is the URL for this. And once again, I'll include that in those links at the bottom, underneath the recording on the webinar page for our campaign. So I wanted to include that as well because there are a lot of great publications out there. Definitely, the one that we featured today is definitely a highlight because it's an entire issue, that was dedicated to the amazing work that Peter and Rusty and Cassie did with the C student, with Alyssa, with the artwork there and the research as well. So, it really all comes together. And as Peter mentioned too, it's an arduous process, but it's so rewarding once those articles get published and that your peers have seen this and really seen that this work is good and your peers have accepted it for publication. So Any final words, Peter Falcon or Peter Nelson, before we adjourn this webinar?
No, none for me, Brian. Just a great job, everyone.
Yep, I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of good data coming in. It seems like we've got a lot of data collection campaigns, and I hope that some of these ways that we're sharing and the methods that we are demonstrating here are inspiring to other people out there, and we can get some researching going on with what we've been sharing with everybody here.
All right. Thank you both. And I'll also mention that the July webinar will be announced shortly. You will see an invite coming to your inbox soon. So until then, remember the Globe Cup Challenge that is starting on Thursday. Also, the Globe Observer Connect event that will be at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time or 1600 UTC on Thursday as well. So make sure you check that. And as I mentioned first, the Artemis 3 information, you can check out that website as well. All those links will be there. So until next time, thank you all for joining. And the recording will be up as soon as I can get it up, when I get the info from Zoom, and then I get the recording uploaded. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.